Social media friends, welcome. How wonderful to be with you on this 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The peace and joy of Jesus be with you always. And our reflection for today here at Mount St. Francis in the Monastery of the Franciscans in Calgary. And our theme for today from the Gospel is Dressed for Action. So let's reflect on that. And when there's a big performance coming up, there is normally a dress rehearsal. A dress rehearsal a few days before the performance. And a dress rehearsal is almost like a real performance, because the purpose of a dress rehearsal is to prepare the participants and the actors and the actresses for the real action that is going to take place in a few days' time, to feel the experience, the thrill of the actual performance. Thirdly, to set the choreography right. Fourthly, also for each one to know their part and own the action in that performance. Also to prepare for all the people that will come there to see the actual performance, and there shouldn't be any glitches. So to prepare for all the glitches and to avoid all showdowns. When we look at our life under a spiritual microscope, it is the same as a dress rehearsal. Our life here is a preparation for the real life to come. Our life here is a time to avoid all the glitches and the showdowns. Our life here is a living in faith, a living faith, living hope, living charity, living love. Our life here is a battleground with all the desires that lead us, unfortunately, away from God. So, all these desires that help us to make the wrong choices in life and take us away from the real thing in life, the real purpose of life. And this is the theme of our 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time, namely, dressed for action. Jesus calls us to be dressed for action. So, what is Jesus telling us, you and I, and all of us, when he says, be dressed for action? He's telling us to live by faith. To live by faith in God. To live by faith in Him. To live by faith in the church, who is the community of believers, the living community of believers in Jesus Christ. To be dressed for action is to have faith in Jesus. Because the action out there is every day in our life. We were introduced into this faith in Christ in our baptism. How much do you know of your baptism? So that you can live your baptism. And all of us have to have a profound understanding of our baptism. At each stage of our life, we need to deepen the understanding of our baptism in Jesus. When we were immersed in water, it's telling us that we have died in Christ and that our old self has now risen in the new self, a new relationship in Christ. That is what baptism is all about. By baptism, we no longer just belong to this age and time. In fact, by our baptism, we just no longer belong to the world. We belong to Jesus. That is what our baptism is all about, that we belong to Jesus. By baptism, we belong to God and to God's family. We belong to Him. We are of God's family. What a great grace and knowledge that is, you know. By baptism, we belong to Christ, who is risen from the dead and is alive. So we believe in a person, and a person who's alive. By baptism, we have a journey to become more and more like Christ, fully alive like Christ. By baptism, we belong to eternity. Are you happy about that? That we belong to eternity? That this life is not everything, that there is eternity awaiting us. So that when Jesus tells us to be dressed for action, then, number one, we live by faith in Him. He is the cornerstone of our faith. Secondly, we are ready and actively living out our task of being formed into Jesus every day. To be dressed for action, all our daily struggles have meaning, and because they have meaning, our life is different because we are preparing for eternity. All this life here is a preparation for eternity. Fourthly, that our daily life is not just life here on earth, but a call to follow Jesus and become like Him every day. Again, to be dressed for action is to see our daily actions and our relationships as a call from Jesus and to Jesus, and to choose and follow Jesus every day. In the first reading today, if you've read the readings for this 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we are told how our ancestors persevered and listened to the prophets, believed in their promises, and walked the journey of life in faith. What a beautiful example. Today, we are faced with the same problems of life and some more new ones because of our technological and scientific progress that we have made, and also of the new morality that we are living in, a morality that comes from not believing in God. If at all, there is a morality that has been created by modern people like you and I. Like our ancestors, we look up to the promises of Jesus. They looked up to the promises of God, and they went into the promised land and lived in the land that was promised to them. Today, we look up to the promises of Jesus. He is the pattern of our life. We focus on Him. We listen to Him. We respond like Him, and we become like Him. So Jesus is the pattern, the model of our life. To be dressed for action, then, is to make choices to become more and more like Jesus, more and more like Him every day. What is that action to which we are called and invited to? The actions are the choices we make to become like Jesus, to choose that path of life that imitates Jesus and follows Him. We are all called every day to choose to become like Him, because the world we are living in is not a conducive environment that encourages faith in God, that encourages faith in Jesus. Why? Because the secular life that we see all around us, in which we are immersed right now, rejects God, rejects heaven, rejects morality, rejects encouraging and nurturing of life. Today, most people are pro-choice, not pro-life. It absorbs selfishness, greed, and self-righteousness. But you and I are called to live a life of faith in Jesus. Jesus is our brother. Jesus is our shepherd. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is our resurrection, and Jesus is the bread of life. To follow this Jesus, then, becomes our choice every day. We become like Him every day. We are called to be like Him. And to be like Him every day, then we need to be dressed for action. That is where Jesus is inviting us to be dressed for action. Nourishing ourselves on His Word, nourishing ourselves at the table of life, the table of the bread of life that He gives us in the Eucharist that we celebrate as Catholics. To be dressed for action is to be a people of faith, the church, and the cross that He offers us is the pathway to everlasting life. Today, as we begin the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time, so let us do the following. Number one, take time to look around you and see your challenges. Have a good look around you. Don't be afraid of lifting up your head and looking around. And see the challenges that your faith is facing every day. Secondly, bring to your mind the people who encouraged you to live a life of faith. There's so many people, good people around you and me, who encourage us to live our faith. Thirdly, listen to Jesus' call to follow Him. Listen with the heart every day to follow Him. In other words, the fourth thing, what are you doing to deepen your love in Christ? What are you doing every day to deepen that faith in Christ? Fifthly, ask yourself if all the choices you are making, are they helping you to become more and more like Jesus? Six, what is the quality of your prayer life and how are you nourishing it every day? Ask yourself, why do you go to church and why not? Dressed for action. The seventh thing that you can ask yourself is, why do you go to church? Or why don't you go to church? We go to church to be strengthened by a community of faith, heading in the same direction. Eighthly, we ask ourselves, how do you encourage others in your journey of faith? Here then, we have enough food to work on during this 19th Sunday and 19th week in Ordinary Time. Here's enough food to work on and to live Jesus' call to be dressed for action. I'd like to end with these words of Jesus from the Gospel today. Jesus says, "See that you are dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like people waiting for their master to return from the wedding feast." Let us be dressed for action.